Guns clearly make it easier for bad things to happen, but they also make it easier for people to protect themselves.
500,000 to about 3 million crimes didn't take place, especially with females, where they didn't get raped because they had a gun to protect themselves or their kids or whatever.
Can you name me one place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns and seen murder rates go down? They all come back with Australia.
People like Abby Chatfield and the sort is they say, Joel, you're not a feminist, you don't believe in abortion rights, you think it's okay to rape women. And it's like, first off, that's not true. I'm actually a bigger feminist than you. I think women should have the right to own a gun to protect themselves.
The vast majority of academic research around the world uses U.S. data. People have this impression that Australia is a safe country. Civilians with concealed carry permits actually stop more of these attacks than police do. Women who behave passively are 2.4 times more likely to end up being seriously injured than a woman who has a gun.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 63 of the Ark podcast. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a phenomenal guest who's flown from America. We're going to be talking a bit about economics, a bit about gun crime. Obviously, in the wake of the Bondi shooting late last year, a lot of laws have been passed as a result, constricting gun control in Australia, constricting gun ownership in rural areas as well as in suburban areas. And this is something where we actually need expertise from outside the country to understand what's going on, what is coming down the pipeline, and where academia is failing us in this country, where government policy is failing us in this country. To help me meander through this topic, we've got the great pleasure of having John Lott, who has come in. He's an economist that has taught at Yale and a number of other universities, and he's currently touring Australia. He's gone and seen some phenomenal universities. He's about to see ANU. He just had a chat with Topher Field earlier this week. He spoke to another guest on our panel, Natalie Duma, to her group last night, and we now have the pleasure of having the chat to him now about where we're going wrong in Australia, what we can learn from the American experience. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's great to talk to you.
Not at all, not at all. Again, it's a brutal flight coming from America. I've done it.
Well, you've done it many times and survived, so
yeah.
I don't have anything to complain about for one trip right now.
But no, look, little old Australia always appreciates expertise from coming out from the States. Forgive me if I describe Americans as Yanks. It's sort of an endearing term.
How could that be offensive? I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
Sometimes they've never heard it, but it was actually. I don't know. I just how do you call me a Yank? I don't support the Yankees.
I mean, maybe if they're from Georgia or Texas, they might be a little bit upset. But but that probably would have been their grandfathers that would have been upset. It's kind of hard to think anybody these days would be, but who knows?
That's right. No, so just to explain how we got in contact, our great mutual friend, Gigi Foster, another American economist that's been living here for a few decades, she was one of the brave economists that called out the lockdowns in Australia, and right. We'll get into the cowardice of other academics and academic institutions. But she connected me and she said, hey, John Lott's coming to Australia.
Yeah, she's amazing.
She's phenomenal. How did you come in contact with her?
Well, there's another academic here named Keston Green, who's at the University of Adelaide. And I've known him for a couple decades. He's one of the senior research scholars on our for the Crime Prevention Research Center, and he put me in contact with her.
Very good, very good.
I mean, I've heard of her before simply because of kind of the ruckus she caused in 2021 when her book came out. So, you know, it's unfortunately, there are not many academics like her in Australia who are willing to stand up and, you know, make what seems like pretty obvious comments about things. You know, just in her case, doing kind of real cost-benefit analysis of the different regulations that were being imposed. You know, too often, whether it's COVID or something else, people say, if I can pass a regulation that saves one life here, then we should do it. But maybe there are other lives you're losing or whatever as a result. Maybe there are other costs that are there. Kids not going to school or other problems that are there, suicides. So you got to look at the costs and the benefits broadly. And, fortunately, she did that. Unfortunately, Australia still suffered a lot.
Absolutely. And I think that'll be a reoccurring theme in this discussion, the fact that the academics are unfortunately, courage is in short supply. And whether that's, I'm keen to hear your thoughts later about whether that's to do with them being threatened or...
I'm not sure. I don't know enough of the academics here, but I will say that you have two things. One is academia worldwide is pretty left-wing. But I think in Australia, there's kind of less diversity of views than you have. In the United States, academia is very left-wing, but at least you still have some academics that are around who are willing to speak out and have different views. I don't think most students who go to universities have a clue how biased and left-wing their professors are. It has an impact. I do guns and crime, and the amount of misinformation out there about what happened after the confiscation in 96 and 97,
right.
Just very simple statistical issues with how people make the arguments that any economist who does empirical work will immediately see the problems with it, and yet nobody spoke out. So if you want, I can give you a simple example.
Please do. And by the way, just to give people context, you're alluding to the John Howard's after the Port Arthur massacre,
right? Yeah,
the forced gun buyback. That's what you should call it, right?
Well, they call it a buyback, but the government didn't own the guns to begin with, so confiscation seems like the most accurate term to me. But whatever, we can call it buyback.
Totally agree.
So all the discussion is in terms of kind of comparing before and after averages. What was the before average firearm homicide rate? What was the after average firearm homicide rate? Or for firearm suicides before and after? The problem is simple before and after averages can be extremely misleading. Let me give you an example. Let's say you had a line that was falling over the whole period, perfectly straight line that was falling. You could pick any point along that line, and the after average is going to be below the before average. But I look at the line, it's falling at exactly the same rate before and after the law. I don't see any impact from the law.
Yeah.
What you'd want to see is, does it fall at a faster rate? Does it fall at a slower rate? Is there some discontinuity that occurs in the line at that point? And when you look at that, the evidence isn't what the gun control advocates would be predicting, because for firearm homicides and firearm suicides, they were both falling for 15 years prior to the confiscation. When the confiscation occurred, the firearm homicide rate actually stopped falling for about 8 years. So I look at that, and it's falling, and then the law stops it from falling further, or is coinciding with it not falling further. And I look at that, and I say, well, if anything, it seems like it had a pernicious effect on it. It didn't make it fall faster. And a similar thing for firearm suicides, that was falling for 15 years prior to, and then when the confiscation occurred, it continued falling at a much slower rate afterwards.
Right.
And there are other issues too. If it were me, I would look at what happened to total suicides or total homicides that were there.
Right.
For suicides, there are lots of different ways of committing suicide. If I could remove there are very few firearm suicides in Australia, but if I could remove all guns in a country, suicides wouldn't disappear. Presumably some of the people, maybe most, who would have used a gun to commit suicide will use something else. And in fact, if you look at firearm suicides in Australia, total suicides actually went up by 20%. Right after the confiscation.
Right.
Now, I'm not going to go and argue that the confiscation caused the suicide rate to go up by 20%, but it sure as heck is inconsistent with the notion that this somehow saved lives that wouldn't have occurred with suicides.
Yep.
And the same thing with homicides. Homicides went up right after the confiscation, total homicides.
Yep.
So, I look at those things and I say it's hard to see a benefit. And one last thing. I mean, these are all things that any moderately competent academic should point out on these things. But yet you look in the debate in Australia and nobody mentions these things. One other thing is just when the confiscation occurred, there was about 29% drop in gun ownership at that time. But people could go and buy guns again after that. And by at least 2010, if not before that, the gun ownership rate in Australia was way above what it was before the confiscation. Well, if that's true, then what you should have seen, if the gun control advocates like Howard and others were right, was you should have seen an immediate sharp drop in things like homicides and suicides, and then an increase over time as the gun ownership rate increased. But you don't see anything like that. It stopped falling for firearm homicides. Yep. There's no sudden drop in an increase. And I could go on, but...
Well, can you give my audience a bit of perspective on the American gun stats? Because often Australians are like, oh, America, look at the 35,000, I don't know what the stat is, amount of gun deaths every year. Last I checked, my stats are a bit old, they're 2018 stats. It was about 35,000 gun deaths.
Well, about more than two-thirds or 70% of those are suicides that occur.
Yeah.
And with regard to murders, I mean, the United States has a higher murder rate than Australia does. Our murder rate this last year is probably going to be about 3.9 or so per 100,000. In Australia, it's about 2 per 100,000, so we're probably twice as high. But there are a couple of things to point out with. The United States is unique in terms of how concentrated our murders are in tiny areas. So only 2% of the counties in the United States account for 56% of the murders. And if you look at a murder map of those 2% of the counties, you have about two-thirds of their murders take place in 10-block areas, very tiny areas within those counties. And
I heard this stat. Yeah.
And it's basically drug gangs fighting against each other. And so, most other countries, it's much more evenly distributed, the murder rates. The other thing just to point out is that Australia has a much higher violent crime rate than the United States does. Yeah. I mean, you look at the media, you listen to people here, people have this impression that Australia is a safe country. And what you find is that something like rapes and sexual assaults, the rate here is like 3 times higher than the U.S. rate. So just a step back, there's 2 types of data that you have. You have data on crimes reported to police, and then you have total crimes, because we know most crimes aren't reported to police. In Australia, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has a survey to try to get a measure of total crime to find out whether people report crimes to police. For something like rape and sexual assaults, only about 19% by their measure of rapes and sexual assaults are reported to police.
Right.
In the United States, it's 45%. Well, that should give you a little bit of caution in just looking at the crimes reported to police there as a measure of crime in the country.
Right.
If you use the ABS survey data, what you find is that rapes, as I say, and sexual assaults are about 3 times higher than the U.S. Assaults are like twice as high here as they are in the United States.
Right. I didn't know any of this.
And the burglary rate here in Australia is like 3 times higher than the burglary rate in the United States. Right. Now, all those are really underestimates of the gap. And the reason is because the Australian Bureau of Statistics puts together these numbers differently than America puts together the numbers. And the way America puts together the numbers, we have something called the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys 240,000 people each year. And if you get, robbed twice in a year, they count that as 2 robberies. In Australia, they count that as 1.
Right.
They just say, have you been victimized by this type of crime over the course of the year? And so if you were to adjust, because people who live in dangerous areas may be robbed more than once, or their house may be burglarized more than once.
That's malpractice, academic malpractice.
Well,
In terms of
it's
statistics.
weird, but you know, there are even more serious problems than that. But so if you adjust those things, it's going to be even much greater gap between Australia's even much worse. And then there's another problem, and that is there's a second way to get at this data, and that is because you're asking people in the ABS survey, have you been a victim of a crime? And they get details on it. And then they say, have you reported it to the police? To get this like 19% for rape and sexual assaults. The other way of doing it, though, is to go and look at the actual number of rapes and sexual assaults that are reported to police and divide it by the number that the survey indicates that are there. And if you do that rather than 19%, it looks like only 9% of rapes and sexual assaults are reported to police.
Right.
Now, I don't know whether Australians are just, you know, they don't want to admit that they don't go and report the crimes to the police. You know, maybe they feel bad.
Might
you
be
know,
a she'll be right attitude.
right.
Something like that.
So, but if you do that, which I think is probably a more natural way of doing it, just see, did they actually report the crimes? Robbery also, only like 9% of robberies are reported to police. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how low it is.
So you've just proceeded to debunk the suicide thing, and I need you to correct me on a statistic on this. I heard that one American, this is, again, my statistics, last time I checked into this was 2018.
Okay.
I haven't revisited it because it's not a top topic in Australia. But I was listening to Stephen Crowder debate on a campus in 2018, and he was saying, look, with these deaths, about half are suicides, a third about gang crime. But when it comes to suicides, the person he was debating said, well, our suicide rate would be lower if we didn't have guns. And he's like, well, no, in a lot of these European countries where they've actually don't have easy access to gun law as easy access, and they've outlawed it in some cases.
They have higher suicide.
They have higher suicide.
Yeah, I don't make that type of argument.
Sure.
And the reason is because there's so many things that can vary across places. What I like to look at is what happens before and after, let's say, you have a gun ban. So there are a number of places that have either banned either all guns or all handguns. And what you'll find is that there'll be a drop in firearm suicides, but there's no change at all in total suicides.
Interesting.
People just switch to other ways of going and committing suicide.
Yeah.
And so, in that way, you kind of, you look at many different places that have done that, and you're kind of controlling for kind of the social differences that exist across places. Because there are lots of reasons, you know, suicide may be more acceptable in some places or not. And so I find that more convincing than that type of claim.
And speaking to the academic malpractice, one thing that Gigi Foster does that you also do, which is phenomenal, is you look at the trade-offs. Okay, if you do this, you might see this positive impact, but you've got this negative impact. Another statistic, I'd love you to fact-check me on this, is I remember Stephen Crowder making the point that, okay, cool, you ban the guns, okay, maybe there's less gun deaths and whatever, but what are you not doing now? And he recited an FBI statistic. He said 500,000 to about 3 million crimes didn't take place, especially with females, where they didn't get raped because they had a gun to protect themselves or their kids or whatever.
Right.
Is there truth behind that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of points that you're bringing up here. Just with the last point, the best estimates that we have recently is about 1.7 million times a year people use guns defensively to go and stop crime. Right. Look, anybody who's read my academic research knows that I think police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But the thing is, police themselves know that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred. Right. In New South Wales here, the average police response time to an emergency urgent call is slightly over 11 minutes. And that's assuming you can make the call. You know, it's not like you can go and tell the criminal, could you please wait while I go and call the police here, you know, while you're attacking me. And a lot of bad things can happen in 11 minutes. And so what you find happen is that there is if my research convinces me of anything, there's basically two groups of people who benefit the most from owning guns. People who are the most likely victims of violent crime, and that in the United States overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas, and people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. You're almost always talking about a young male criminal doing the attack, and when a man is attacking a woman, there's a lot larger strength difference that exists there on average than when a man is attacking another man. And there's a myth out there that's based on a real misreading of the statistics, which claims that people should behave passively when they're confronted by a criminal. And that comes from something called the National Crime Victimization Survey in the United States that I referenced earlier. But the problem with it is it's comparing passive behavior to all forms of active resistance lumped together. And it's true, passive behavior is slightly safer than everything lumped together, but there's huge differences in the outcomes for different types of active resistance. So, for example, for a woman, by far the most dangerous course of action for a woman to take when she's confronted by a criminal is to use her fists. If she uses her fists, she's going to get a physical response back from the attacker and likely end up being seriously injured or killed. The second most dangerous course of action for a woman to take is to run away. Now, obviously, if a woman can run away and escape, that's great. But the problem is that women tend to be relatively slower runners than men are. And in the process of being tackled and subdued, there can be serious injuries that can occur. Yeah. So, and there are other things like using a baseball bat, or maybe it's a cricket, would be, a cricket bat in Australia, or you having a knife or something like that. The problem for a woman is that if she's in physical contact, close physical contact with a guy, she's in trouble. She's likely to lose control of the situation. You swing a bat at somebody and they catch it, and what easily. Option do they have? Yeah. The benefit that and there are other things like using mace or a stun gun. Mace, if it's windy or if it's raining, or if the person's been exposed to it before, because people get resistance to it. Plus, it may take 30 seconds before it affects somebody, and if they're right next to you, you may not have 30 seconds. There are real limits with stun guns. About 30% of the time that the police in the United States use a stun gun, it affects the attacker, but it depends on how thick the clothing are.
So what was the percentage?
30%.
That's nothing.
Right. Well, it depends on lots of things, like how thick the clothing is, whether the person is wearing rubberized-soled boots or shoes there. A lot of people wear tennis shoes out there. And so, or sneakers, whatever you want to call them. And it just, and that affects whether or not you'll have the grounding and whether the electricity will go through the person or not. If it's winter and they're wearing heavy coats, a leather coat or something, all those things can affect whether it would have an impact. And it's the reason why the police also carry guns in addition to the stun guns that are there.
Right.
So there are real limits to those things. And the one thing, though, that's by far the safest course of action for women and the elderly is to have a gun. Women who behave passively are 2.4 times more likely to end up being seriously injured than a woman who has a gun. And, it's just...
Is that why they call it the great level up? Because
Great equalizer, right.
So great equalizer. So 98% of the time where a woman has a gun, it helps those situations. And there's so much footage of this. I remember seeing one video of a lady with her very young children below the age of 6 at a zebra crossing in America. And there was someone that tried to steal his purse or violently attack him. And she was very well trained. She went through the proper training, pulled her gun, and he totally backed off straight away. She never had to discharge them.
About 95% of the time that Americans use guns defensively, they don't fire the gun. Simply brandishing the gun is enough to... In fact, it's way less than 1% of the time is the attacker wounded or killed. It's fairly rare.
One of the pernicious ideologies that I hear, John, all the time in Australia from people like Abby Chatfield and The Sword, is they say, Joel, you're not a feminist. You don't believe in abortion rights, or basically you think it's okay to rape women. And it's like, first off, that's not true. I'm actually a bigger feminist than you. I think women should have the right to own a gun to protect themselves in murder or rape or being beaten up. I truly believe women should have that right, obviously being properly trained and properly checked and vetted for, mentally and whatever. But I just cannot believe that we've got some of these, let's say, third wave feminists that come through and they say, we don't think that women should own a gun. I'm like, how could you say that after beating me over the head saying, you believe you're against women and you're not a feminist or whatever?
Well, particularly, we just went through what the rape and sexual assault rates are here in Australia. They're astronomical compared to the United States, 3 times higher. And that's even without adjusting for this thing about, maybe somebody was sexually assaulted more than once during a year, and that's not counted in the Australian numbers. So, there's a problem here in terms of women being able to go and protect themselves. I don't, I don't think, and also there seems to be a problem in terms of the rate that women are willing to report these things to the police. Somebody needs to look into that. But there's been a lot of research over the years on why people report crimes to the police at different rates. A lot of it has to do with whether they think the criminal will be caught and punished. If you don't think the criminal is going to be caught and punished, then there's not why go through the hassle of dealing with it? Yeah. Somebody, some academic here needs to kind of look into those things more. But first of all, just recognizing that you have a problem. Look, I was chief economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission in Washington. And while I was there, I must have read over 1,000 trial transcripts. And what you find is that criminals, in some sense, are like others in that if they can get the job done at less risk to themselves, they'll do it that way. So what you find in these trial transcripts is that you'll very frequently get one of the criminals to essentially plea bargain and turn evidence against other criminals that were involved.
Right.
And so you have a robbery case where they'll say things like, and they'll ask the same questions. How did you pick this particular victim? And they'll say, well, we're thinking about going after the drug dealers down the street because they have a lot of money. But they also have guns. It'd be pretty crazy to go after them. Or we were talking about going after a cab driver. But, a lot of the cab drivers have guns, so we didn't want to do that. And then we saw this small woman walking alone across a parking lot late at night by herself, and she looked like a really easy target. And so we went after her.
Right.
And because of the strength differences in others, women make really attractive targets for the criminals. Plus, as I mentioned before, on average, there's some women who are extremely fast, but on average, women aren't as fast of a runner. And so if the criminal robs them or does something to them, he can escape without them being able to go after him much.
John, you're a breath of fresh air. It's always a pleasure having an academic that knows their stuff in studio, because often we end up getting fact checks by the Australian Associated Press and The Sword, and they like to pull up any academic that disagrees with us. They put a big call out to the world of academics and okay, who's going to disagree with Joel Jamal?
It's nice that they feel you're that important that they have to go and deal with you on that.
But what they then do, John, is they get commissioned. The AAP has a contract with Meta to basically go and fact check us. So when these videos we put up go on Facebook, go on Instagram, it then gives them license to Meta to grab these articles, use the AAP fact check to downgrade our content for 90 days, 3 months where we're just totally, our engagement's tanked. And what's out? There's no recourse. There's no number you can talk to. There's no, hey, I've got statistics from John Lott that dispute that. And they're like, nope, there's no appeal process. But I want to pivot because
I know this stuff. Sorry.
Sure. No, you're right. You're right.
Not only have I been an academic at places from Stanford, University of Chicago, the Wharton Business School, Yale, UCLA, Rice, but I was chief economist for the United States Sentencing Commission, and more recently, I was the senior advisor for research and statistics in the U.S. Department of Justice, both the Office of Justice Programs and the Office of Legal Policy.
Sure.
So this
So you know you're talking.
data
Yeah.
is based, and now I'm president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and people can find all the data and everything that we're talking about on our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
No, look, I want to. Part of the reason for your trip is obviously. Well, this may not be the reason. You may have been planning on coming here for some time, but it is very topical right now. There's a lot of, especially rural gun owners, that are very unhappy about the gun laws that have been passed when they see it as an urban issue with guns and gun owners. With the recent Bondi shooting, 2 men, I do believe they legally acquired these arms.
Father did, right?
Despite the fact that they were on watch lists with ACO, there was a lack of background checks. I wanted to ask you, have you looked into the new gun laws that have been passed and what restrictions?
Yeah, I have been. Here, I think the argument over gun control laws in Australia is misplaced. So I've seen some of the stuff that the shooters groups here in Australia put out, and they talk about, people being able to go and do competitive shooting or the benefit that farmers get from it, and all that's fine. But if you're going to win these debates, you have to go and deal with people in the middle of the debate. And people in the middle of the debate are willing to trade off freedom for safety type of thing. You tell them, okay, we have competitive shooters. And I say, well, I can save lives. What's the big deal with competitive shooters? And you'll lose that battle every time. What you have to explain to people is that it's a safety issue. These gun control laws will actually endanger people. And one of the big problems that you have is you pass one gun control law that essentially creates all these gun-free zones in places, and that creates attacks. And then rather than going back and undoing the original regulation, they pass more regulation. So I've studied mass public shootings, you mentioned Bondi, around the world. And one thing that you see is that when you ban guns, in places, that actually serves as a magnet for attacks to occur in those places. So the media bias is just overwhelming. But I force myself to read the diaries and manifestos for these individuals when they do it. And time after time after time, they explicitly explain why they picked the target that they did. And they explain that they picked the target because guns were banned in places. And I want somebody to give me a benign explanation for why the media doesn't think that's newsworthy to go and report on. They'll go and report on the diary or manifesto. They'll go and they'll say things like, the murderer was talking about other mass murderers. And that's true. But he was talking about him in terms of what he could learn from those other mass murderers.
Right.
And we have a collection, literally dozens of statements from these mass murderers where they may be crazy in some sense, but these guys aren't stupid. Overwhelmingly, you have people who do these attacks they have a cause or they want to get publicity, and they know if they go, the more people they kill, the more media attention they're going to get. Yeah. And they know if they go to a place where their victims are unarmed, they're going to be able to go and kill more people and get more media attention.
Yeah.
We had a school shooting in September in Minneapolis at a Catholic school. And the murderer there explained not only the target, but the timing of the target. He picked it because it was a gun-free zone, but he also didn't want to do it in the morning when parents were dropping off their kids at school, or in the afternoon when they're picking them up, because he was worried that one of the parents might have a permanent concealed handgun and be able to use it to go and stop his attack. And that's the type of planning that you see over and over in these guys. And, so again, in Minnesota, if you or I were to carry a gun onto school property in Minnesota, it's a 5-year prison term. For you or I, our lives would be completely turned upside down and destroyed, being a felon and having 5 years in prison. But let's say you're the murderer there, and the murderer died, as they usually do in these attacks. But let's say because then the penalties afterwards are irrelevant, but let's say they had lived, murdered 2 people, wounded 17 others, probably facing 5, 6 life sentences. Does anybody think taking 5 years away from their 6th or 7th life represents a penalty to them? It's not a penalty. All you've done is set up a penalty structure so that the law-abiding good citizens will obey the rule, and the criminal can take advantage of that. It makes it attractive for him to go there. And there's one other point I need to make here, and that is, as I mentioned before, I think police are the single most important factor for reducing crime, but police have an incredibly difficult and dangerous job when it comes to stopping these mass shootings. And the reason is because police are in uniform, and that gives real tactical advantages to the killers there. So let's say there had been a police officer at Bondi Beach in uniform.
Yeah.
What could the killers have done there? They could wait till the officer till he leaves, right? Or they could go on, maybe move to another target themselves. Or if they were going to do that attack first, who do you think they shoot first? They would shoot the officer first. Yep. The first two things make it less likely that officers will be present if an attack's going to occur. The second one, we've done research looking at all the active shootings in the United States from 2014 through 2024. Civilians with concealed carry permits actually stop more of these attacks than police do because of the first two types of points I was making.
Right.
But even though the police stop fewer of these attacks, they're 12 times more likely to be killed in these attacks than civilians are. Because having somebody in uniform is kind of like having a neon sign above them that says, shoot me first. The example I give, in the United States, we have air marshals that fly on planes in case there's a terrorist attack.
Yep.
Do you think air marshals ought to be in uniform? No, why not? Nobody thinks air marshals ought to be in uniform. And why not? And the reason is because if there is a terrorist on the plane, then he's going to know who it is he has to worry about.
That's right.
And so, the advantage that you have in the United States, we have about 21 million concealed carry permit holders. We have 29 constitutional carry states where it's not even necessary to have a permit to be able to go and carry. You have no clue whether somebody next to you is carrying concealed or not.
And it was in the Bondi incident, the miracle shot was shot by an off-duty investigator, police investigator who was armed. Uh-huh. He was outgunned. He was not on the bridge. He didn't have the high vantage point, and behind a tree, he shot a shot. It wasn't the other cops in uniform. It was him that made the shot. And I think if some of our veterans, and there are a lot of veterans that live in Bondi, if they were able to concealed carry, they could have ended these guys and maybe
they won't even let the Jewish security people be armed. I mean, explain that to me. I don't understand why you won't.
It's ridiculous. And the other thing is the gun-free zones in America, correct me if I'm wrong, that is where disproportionate out of the guns.
93% of the mass public shootings in the United States take place in areas where guns are banned.
It's insane.
Okay. And those are small areas in the country. I mean, you may have a couple or a few percent of a state are gun-free zones. So you can carry almost any place. It's not random. If it was random, only a couple percent of the mass public shootings would take place in areas where it's banned. But as I say, just read the diaries and manifestos. These guys plan these attacks long in advance.
Yeah.
They look at other mass shootings that occur. 6 months is a short amount of time. And, in the Bondi case, the guy went for training in the Philippines, apparently. Yeah. So obviously, I don't know how long they were planning this in advance, but at least it was a ways in advance.
John, sorry, finish your point, please. I was going to say, with this whole investigation, not only do they rush through laws on an emotional basis, you've got all the facts on your side with regards to this from previous experience, but they rush these laws through before the investigation's concluded. It's still ongoing. You don't even know how these guys got trained.
Well, that's one big difference between the United States and Australia, and that is you have a parliamentary system which allows you to get laws through very quickly if you have a party that is in power. In the United States, since we have a House and a Senate, and you have a filibuster rule where you have to get, a supermajority vote to get something through the Senate, and a president who may not all be of the same party, for example, and may have slightly different constituents that are there, that it makes it more difficult to go and do things quickly. And that allows time for reflection on these things. In the United States, the gun control people, they will try to get things done within like a couple weeks of an attack without the type of investigation or thoughtfulness in the process. A lot of these rules that they're putting in law now, 10 guns, would it have affected this attack? The guy had 5 guns, right? So 10 guns, that would make a difference. So what's the logic in terms of stopping another Bondi attack? There's
no. Well, this is what's frustrating, John, and this is why it's a pleasure to have you on. What's your argument to people that would say, you mentioned the Minnesota, the mass shooting at the school. A lot of Australians would say, well, look, they go for the low blow. You may still have thousands of deaths every year that aren't suicide, aren't gang-related, aren't sort of murders. They're mass shootings at schools. I mean, what's your argument to those people to say, hey, like...
Well, I think, okay, we have 14,000 public schools in the United States that allow teachers and staff to carry. We have about 100,000 public schools. There has not been one single attack where anybody's been wounded or killed at any of the schools that allow teachers and staff to carry.
Wow.
And all the attacks where people have been wounded or killed have occurred in places where it's banned. Some of them have had armed police officers there, and they have the problems that we were talking about before. And so rather than having a sign in front of a school that says this school is a gun-free zone, have a sign in front of the school that says, warning, select teachers and staff at this school are carrying concealed and will use the gun, even if they're not even carrying. Just the fact that somebody's worried about it will stop them. Look, unlike you, we have a First Amendment. And, you read the diaries and manifestos, these murderers will, and it's true worldwide, will say things like, if I can only kill more people than such and such did, I can get more media attention on it. Well, you don't need to get rid of the First Amendment to deal with that. What you need to, and I don't even know how I would do it, but the point is that it teaches you what you have to do, because you have to take away their media attention. And what determines that is how quickly somebody can be there with a gun to stop them. The longer it takes, we're talking about 11-minute time on average for police response time here in New South Wales. The faster somebody can be there, and if they know that there's a chance that somebody will be there quickly, they know they're not going to be able to kill that many people. I mean, I don't know, I've heard too many different numbers about how long the police response time was in Bondi Beach. I've heard from 5 minutes. I've heard other estimates that are long.
Yeah.
But the, maybe the investigation will eventually get that straightened out. But the problem is, even 5 minutes was a long time. 15 people were killed. You had 43 people injured in that. And so, but you got to convince these guys that there's somebody there who might be able to go and stop them.
It's disgusting, and I think we've lost the plot, to be frank. And it's a shame, because this has sort of been coming for 30 years now. A lot of Australians would say, well, look, we haven't had a mass shooting like this for 30 years. And that is credibility as to why we shouldn't have guns and whatever. But I think that's more credit to the fact that we had such a socially cohesive society and a healthy society. But as the economy starts to take a turn, as mass immigration starts to come through, we're having some unsavory types come through.
So again, this is an example of kind of poor statistical work, making that type of analogy. And that is, I could point to maybe about 15 states in the United States that gun control people say have really no good gun control laws, that have had no mass public shootings.
Right.
Do I go and say, well, that proves that? You don't pick one observation there in order to do it. So I look at Europe, for example. Western Europe, you have a country like France. France has had a number of mass public shootings. Yeah. If you look over since 2010, they've had the worst mass public shooting compared to Western Europe and the United States. They had the concert shooting at the end of 2015 where 130 people were killed. That's much worse than any mass public shooting in the United States. France has stricter gun control laws than Australia's had. Okay.
So you have to compare apples to apples.
Well, you have to have lots of observations and lots of places there. You just can't pick one place. I could pick one state in the United States and just say, well, this state hasn't had any mass public shootings, has very loose gun, regulations. And so it must be loose gun regulations will lead to that. Now, I think, getting rid of gun-free zones and things like that would be a loose regulation that would help.
Sure.
But I'm just saying I wouldn't make the argument just based on one observation that's there.
You need to look at the gold standard in America. This state has concealed carry. It doesn't have gun-free zones. You got to compare that to Australia, not the whole of America.
Well, you can compare. Okay, one thing people don't understand is that the vast majority of academic research around the world uses U.S. data. Now, why is that? And the reason is because we have 51 different laboratories. You have 50 states and the District of Columbia, and they may pass different laws at different times. And so you can go and say, okay, well, when this state, let's say, made it easier for people to carry guns, maybe they also spent more money on police. And maybe this other state made it easier for people to carry guns in a different year, and they increased criminal penalties for people going and committing crimes. And you have lots of things that may be occurring at the same time. But if I have enough experiments in enough different years that I can begin to control for all those other factors and see, after I try to account for differences across places, what happens to things like crime rates? Did it go up or down afterwards? What's the pattern? And that's the way you do real statistical research.
So for the benefit of the audience, if you were to say, hey, Australia, you're going down this path of very left-wing liberal mentality of passing these sort of gun laws in the name of safety.
Right.
Well, that's which state? California?
Well, California probably has the strictest gun control laws.
So that would be the best point of comparison.
Well, I wouldn't just look at one place again. But the thing is, California actually has a rate of mass public shootings that's much higher than the national average and higher than states like Texas or Florida that people, will try to demonize. Okay. And that's true whether you look at the data from 2000 on or 2010 on or 2020 on, whatever period of time you want to pick. California has a much higher rate of mass public shootings than the rest of the country or those other states.
And what I'm really eager to understand is...
and that's per capita. That's the other thing.
Per capita.
Yeah, right.
Because millions in California. I do spend a lot of time looking at American politics, and there are a lot of people on, let's say, the very far end of the spectrum in terms of gun protections. They don't want anything to impinge. I'm trying to remember the exact wording of the Second Amendment, which is that
shall not infringe.
Shall not infringe. So It's pretty black and white. Do you think that there are some gun laws where perhaps, like, for example, background checks? Would you support a national gun registry and background checks on all gun owners, or do you think that's harmful?
Background checks and registry are two different things.
Sure.
And I have no problem with background checks. My problem with them is how we run it in the United States. So, for example, gun control advocates will go and say, well, we've been, since background checks were first passed in the 1990s, we've had about 5 million so-called dangerous or prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. And that's simply false. What they should say is we've had 5.1 million initial denials, and something over 99% of those are mistakes. It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun, but that's not what they're looking at. Is roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays. And the problem is that discriminates against certain groups. So, for example, people tend to have names similar to others in their groups. Hispanics have names similar to other Hispanics. blacks tend to have names similar to other blacks. 34% of black males in the United States are felons. 18% of Hispanic males are felons. 6% of white males are felons. And about 1.5% of Asian males are felons. Well, where are you going to get the mistakes then? You're going to get it among black and Hispanic males, law-abiding, good people who just want to get a gun to protect themselves and their families, simply because they're unlucky enough to have a name that's roughly phonetically similar and a similar birthday to somebody who is prohibited from being able to do it. And there's no reason why that should be occurring. If private companies had an error rate, private companies do background checks on employees. If a private company had an error rate in doing background checks on employees that was 1/100th the error rate that the federal government has, under federal law, they'd be sued out of existence. If you're going to go to an employer and say, well, I just think you should look at roughly phonetically similar names and ignore middle names and things like that, they'll look at you like you're from Mars on it, because they would know, why do I want to have a system where there'd be a lot of mistakes that would be occurring there?
Right.
And so I have no problem with the background checks, but fix that problem.
Yeah.
And also the costs. So a lot of gun control advocates want to pass what they call universal background checks. And these are background checks on the private transfers of guns. If you and I lived in Washington, D.C., we'd have to find, or California or many other places, we'd have to find a licensed dealer. And if I were to go and give you a gun, I'd have to give it to the dealer. He'd do a background check, and then he would give it to you. It costs, in D.C., it costs $125 to do the background check. Just to give you an example of what I think the purpose of these laws are, the way they're set up. If I were to give you 4 guns, it's still just one person giving one other person 4 guns. You think I'm giving them all at the same time.
Yeah.
You think it's just one background check. But no, they require a separate background check on each gun. So rather than $125, which is bad enough, it's $500 for me to do the transfer. And so I would argue, as an economist, I'd make 2 points. One is you're asking people to do something that you think is good. You don't tax that. If I want you to go out of your way to go and find a licensed dealer, do I make you pay $125 to do that?
You do it for free. Like in Australia, we have a working with children's check, where it's a free police check where you say, right, hey, I need you to run my name through the system. Here's my driver's license.
Right, yeah.
I need you to clear me for working with children. That's like a pedophile check.
Yeah, yeah.
But they do it for free. They don't charge you. They want to incentivize you.
Right, yeah.
It, you know, especially if it's mandatory.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Totally agree.
And on top of that, if you really believe that this reduces crime, then the background check reduces crime for everybody, not just the law-abiding people who are going out of their way to obey the law there and make the transfer. And I would argue, as an economist, is if whoever benefits should be the ones who pay. If everybody benefits, then pay for it out of general revenue. And so both of those things, both fixing the errors and paying for it out of general revenue, I've offered many times over the decades to go and write an op-ed with gun control advocates. I said, look, I'm happy to go and support your universal background checks if you'll make these 2 changes that are there. Get rid of the errors, okay, and pay for it out of general revenue. They refuse. They have never taken me up on it. I've offered to heads of all the different gun control groups that are there. And I look at that and I say, look, you guys say you want reasonable regulations. I just want a reasonable fix. Explain to me why you don't want to fix these errors. If you have a background check system where over 99%, so like, you know, you'll see in any given year, maybe there'll be a couple 100,000 denials that will occur, or at least 125,000 or so. And I tell you, they're only prosecuting like 20 cases.
Yep.
And they maybe get 12 convictions. You know, there's a reason for that. And that is, if you go and talk to the people who are in charge of prosecuting them, they'd love to these are simple cases to prosecute. You sign the form, the 4473, saying that you're not a felon. Okay. Well, if you are a felon if you've been in jail for 5 years, you just can't say, I forgot I was in prison for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
That's not a defense.
No.
You're going to, when they did the background check, they took the ID. They probably have a picture of the ID. They probably got you on video doing it. These are like the simplest cases in the world to prosecute.
Yeah.
You know, you can say, well, I wasn't there, and I got you on video. I got your ID. I have a photo of it. You matched the ID when I ran it. And yet, and yet they don't prosecute these cases. And if you talk to the prosecutors, they'll say, look, we'd love to get them. They're simple cases. We don't even need to go to court.
Yeah.
But they're not real cases because it's simply somebody had a name similar to somebody who was prohibited.
That's ridiculous. And look, as someone, so my name is Joel Jamal. Jamal, often people look at me and they're like, hang on, that's like a black name.
Yeah, I guess it maybe is.
Is Jamal.
In the US, it may be.
Yeah, so sometimes they're like, hang on, is Jamal your last name? And I'm like, yeah, it's my last, it goes back to the Middle East,
right.
A couple thousand years.
Right.
It's not my first name, but it confuses them because they're not used to that. And that may prevent me getting a gun if I was an American citizen and whatever, because they'd be like, well, you're from this demographic, therefore you can't. But let's say I was from that demographic. Let's say I was in those areas and I was a law-abiding citizen, never committed a crime, and I need that gun to protect me and my community.
Right.
I would be prevented from doing that, which would have been a net positive for the community. So that's what you're saying.
Exactly. And the thing is, I mean, you can go and hire a lawyer to help you, if you get unfairly denied.
Right.
But you're talking about like $3,000 on up.
Right.
And so basically what you've done is poor or middle class, even minorities, they're being stopped from being able to go and buy a gun to protect themselves and their families. And, even somewhat wealthier people, they may want to have a gun, but is it really worth $3,000 to fix a problem that's through no fault of their own?
No. Well, with the forced gun buyback, which has come back now because of the Bondi shooting, they basically have rushed this through. And one of the big contentions that Senator Matt Canavan from the National Party said, because he's over a rural area,
right.
He said, we haven't considered this. Have you considered the fact that criminals will import guns into Australia, and they do have ways to do that because they already do it with drugs, and then they sell those guns to the government at a profit, and it becomes a business model. So the government will be funding, foreign criminal organizations. They'll be importing guns into Australia. Through this buyback scheme, they'll sell it to the government for a profit. Has any of this been considered? And the answer is no.
Yeah, it's really stupid. So basically the amount that they pay is a function of how old the gun is that's there. And so in theory, you could have a non-working gun that you could sell to them that's old gun, and you'll get something for it.
Yeah.
And
bring us your faulty guns.
Right.
We'll give you cash.
And that, when we have had buybacks in the United States, which have kind of gone out of style, that's basically the only types of guns that got turned in. People would turn it in, they'd get $100 or whatever for the gun, and the gun may have been worth $25 or whatever.
So it's also a way of washing money in a way.
But you bring up another important point in a different way, and that is around the world, as we mentioned earlier, different places have tried to ban guns, either all guns or all handguns. Every single time, either all guns or all handguns have been banned, murder rates have gone up. You would think just out of randomness, once or twice, murder rates would go down. If gun control advocates are right that guns on net are bad, it should be easy to find lots of places like that. But not only did they go up, but they go up many times. Now, I know people will say, well, in Chicago and Washington, D.C., when you tried handgun bans, that wasn't a fair test because people could still get guns from the rest of Illinois or Indiana or Maryland or Virginia.
Yeah.
But that doesn't explain why it went up. It may explain why the murder rates didn't go down as they were predicting. I mean, they could still get guns from those other places to begin with. But the thing is, even island nations that have tried to ban guns, the Solomon Islands or Jamaica or Republic of Ireland or the UK with the handgun ban that they had, in all those places, murder rates went up immediately after the ban went into effect. Now, some of it, they'll say, well, some of the peaks are due to things like drug gangs fighting against each other. And you brought up a point a second ago about how drug gangs bring drugs into the country. Well, it's not like a drug gang can go to the police and say, look, this other gang stole our drugs. Can you help us get them back? What they have to do is they have to have their own little militaries to protect that valuable property. If you could click your fingers and cause all illegal drugs in Australia to disappear and all guns, how long do you think it would be before illegal drugs started coming back into Australia?
Very quickly.
And how long do you think it would be before those drug organizations would bring in weapons to protect that valuable property, if only from other drug gangs that are there? And the same thing is true in the United States. A major source of illegal guns are drug dealers.
Yeah.
They have weapons. They can make money going and selling drugs. They can make money selling guns. You look at a country like Mexico, for example. Mexico, since 1972, has had one gun store in the country. The most powerful, it used to be very unregulated, but it's run by the military. The most powerful gun you're able to go and buy in Mexico is a .22 caliber short round bolt action rifle. It's
nothing.
Australia has strict gun control laws in that.
Right. And look at Mexico.
Yeah.
It's a total cesspit.
Exactly. Right. And the murder rate is more than twice as high now as it was before they put that regulation in. And only less than 1/10 of 1% of the adult population in Mexico is legally licensed to own a gun. Okay? Just to apply to get a license costs you $2,300. And there's no guarantee that they'll give it to you. In fact, it's a low probability. You give them the $2,300 and it's gone.
Yeah.
And there's almost no chance you'll get it. And the thing is, so in Mexico, the drug cartels bring in drugs from around the world, and they bring in the weapons from around the world in order to protect that valuable property that they have.
This is just bad public policy. To make matters worse, and I might be a bit sensitive in telling people about my situation, but during COVID, we did see a lot of existing gun laws before Bondi in 2020, 2021. We really saw the government wield those against people that are speaking up against the government. So people like myself, people like mutual friends of Rami and I during those years, like Mario Malik, even the Aussie Cossack, he's probably a little less savory, but Romeo Georges, they'd have their family heritage guns taken off them or their own guns taken off them that were legally bought in a safe within the law because they were criticizing the premier, our governors or government representatives. Just because you hop online and you do a video, what they do is they slap, in Australia, they call it a firearm prohibition order. And that gives the permission to the police not only to come to your home
because you're a dangerous person, I guess.
Yep, they confiscate the gun, but get this, John, it gets worse. Even after they've confiscated the gun, anytime you are driving in the community, they can pull you over without any cause and they can search your car. That's what a firearm prohibition order allows them to do under the current laws. And that's why I get so frustrated with and that puts people like me at risk, for example, because obviously we're out there, we're getting millions of views online. We're talking truth to power, we're giving it to the man.
Thank you for doing what you do. I'm sure it's
thank you so much. But they didn't use any of these laws on these men. They didn't actually work on the intelligence agency's information. These men were cleared for gun ownership. Whereas with right-wingers, with people that are criticizing the zeitgeist, they come down like a ton of bricks on us, putting our own lives at peril. So I can't own a gun in my house for that reason. I would have to keep it
even
locked.
Now, even years after the...
Well, you know what it is? Because I saw it happen to some of my friends during COVID, it has an icing effect. So I know that I don't want to give the police permission to pull me over anytime. So I haven't owned my guns. I haven't owned my guns at the home, or you'd have to keep them at the gun range or whatever in a locker. But now, for those of you listening that may be thinking about doing me harm, like, oh, Joel's unarmed. Don't worry, it's not in my name. There's other people around me that would die for me, and don't worry, they'll take care of me before you get get too excited. So I have to say that for my own safety. But the point is, this is the general population we're talking about. It even gets worse for people that are of influence, that have followings and whatever.
Right.
This is where I really don't want to see America going. But
this last election made a huge difference, at least temporarily. I mean, we have information that's come out. Tulsi Gabbard's released about how the Biden administration was working closely with social media companies to go and censor what people's comments that were there. I mean, I've had my accounts blocked on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. Well, in fact, it's ironic. My accounts on Twitter were blocked because of the mosque shooting in New Zealand.
Really?
I put out tweets saying that, if you read the murderer's manifesto, this guy is a raving socialist, communist
He's
type
like
guy.
an eco-fascist.
Yeah,
how he
exactly.
described himself.
Right.
Like, that's not right wing.
He was exactly. He was upset with the people that he was shooting because he thought they were having too many kids, and he thought that having kids damaged the environment. His ideal form of government was communist China. The guy called himself a socialist, and he hated companies. And yet the New Zealand government and the Australian government at the time essentially asked social media companies to censor people who were referencing the guy's manifesto that was there. And so I had two accounts. I had my own personal account, which I got locked down. I was basically required to go and apologize for putting that out there and to remove the tweet that I had there. And then what I did was I wrote an op-ed about the whole situation for the New York Daily News, which is kind of a liberal outfit. And then I tweeted a link to that article in the Crime Prevention Research Center Twitter account. And then that got blocked because I was linking to the newspaper article that I had written.
Yeah.
And, it was just, and I don't know how many months, maybe 6 months or something, the stuff was locked down because I never apologized, but I finally just deleted the original tweets that were there.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. I mean, the censorship in different parts of the world, would reach out and affected even in the United States. And it wasn't like anybody said I was wrong on it. I mean, you read the same stuff in the guide, but for some reason, it was wrong because the governments in both Australia and New Zealand had this narrative that he was a right winger. Yeah,
and that's the power of the media, and that's why we have our media organization trying to push back on stuff to get the facts out, get academics out that don't perhaps have the same press as the ones that are handpicked by the Australian Associated Press, or the ones that have the privileged media access to Channel 7, Channel 10, Channel 9. But censorships during COVID, we really did see that at another level. I mean, on our YouTube channel, we lost a whole channel, which was 15,000 subscribers. We actually, two of them got manually kneecapped. They haven't grown in 4 years.
Wow.
And it's not for lack of getting views. We've been getting millions, probably 4 million views since 2021 on some of these channels. We've got 4 channels. They haven't grown. I remember the Turning Point Australia page, when we started it in September 2021, we got to 100,000 followers within about 4 months. And then for 3 or 4 years, we got totally kneecapped.
Right.
We never tipped 100,000.
I know the feeling.
And it only just recently, we've recently tripled our following. The ban lifted after Charlie Kirk was shot, strangely, on Facebook. We're now at 340,000 followers in Australia, which is one of the biggest Facebook pages. But we know they do this. We know they mess with us. And it's almost as though they're trying to bully us into sort of giving up. But
well, I had a similar experience with Twitter. For years, I was stuck at 27,000 followers. Just wouldn't budge, no matter what. Just wouldn't change. And then Elon Musk put in his bid for Twitter, and it went up to about 35,000.
Yeah.
And then Elon Musk withdrew his bid, and it went right back down to 27,000.
Down.
And then
Wow.
Elon Musk went through with his bid that was there, and now it's up to like 52,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it just
They do a lot of these things. One of the things on Instagram, I don't know if you have an Instagram, but they have.
a little bit, no, much.
So I got to 30,000 followers very quickly in 2021, and after my town hall speech, I was at the front of a protest in 2021. They tried to throw me in prison for 6 months for my speech. It was the most expensive speech I've ever given. It cost me $30,000
Right.
in legal fees to basically beat the charges. And
So you weren't getting paid for the talk. You were
no. I was well. If you want to know,
I'm just making a joke about normally people get paid for talks.
It's the Hillary Clinton, a few 100,000.
You had to pay for.
I had to pay. So what happened was I was covering. Rami was there, so that's why he's laughing. But it was a protest I was covering as a journalist, and journalists were exempt from. They were allowed to do their job basically. And I was there on the ground, and the police couldn't control this crowd. There was no leader of the crowd, but because I had an online following, the crowd responded to me. They just did. So the police approached me.
Right.
I got this on camera. They approached me. They asked me to help them facilitate safely getting to town hall steps because they didn't have control over the crowd. They were trying to shut it down initially, but as 50,000 people started to flow in, they only had 100 police officers.
Right, yeah.
This was out of their control. And I don't want to see a protest go through the city, and they were very angry. There were people getting, beat up, arrested, and whatever. These people had come. They were out of their jobs. They closed down the construction industry. We'd had almost 100 days of lockdown by that point. Which someone had to step up and articulate their concerns. Otherwise, they were just going to keep on going. So I got on the steps. I said to the police, look, I'd appreciate you not charging me. They said, oh, we're going to charge you. But I said, I appreciate you not doing it, but we do need to work together on this to basically articulate these issues. So I went to town hall steps. We got there. I begged them, let me get on the steps. I need to basically give a speech on why people are angry. And I got up there and I gave a speech, and this is really what kind of put me on the map. And I said, all right, Gladys Berejiklian, Premier of New South Wales, Governor of this state, you have let these people down. Why are you locking down Liverpool? What are you doing to the people of this country? I called for an end to lockdowns, an end to any kind of vaccine mandate, and
for people to do it peacefully.
Yeah, and I was very clear. I said to the audience, I said, if you're against violence, cheer now. And it was the biggest cheer. It was a bit of a poll of the crowd. And I said an end to lockdowns, end to mandates, an end to one other thing. And then ivermectin. I said, we want an answer from the TGA on ivermectin today. We want to know, does it work? All those things ended up being true. And we know that thanks to Gigi Foster, lockdowns don't work. Right. We know that with regards to ivermectin. But with regards to the censorship I experienced after that, the police, after that, they came after me, tried to throw me in prison. They visited my house 9 times. They tracked people like Anthony Kalouf. They tracked his phone to the western suburbs, and then they threw him in prison. They hunted us like dogs, and they used laws on the books. And this is why I really hate there's no accountability with this Bondi shooting. I know what they can do because they did it to us, and they didn't do it to these Bondi guys. And they proceeded to then censor us after that. My Instagram, forgive the rant, but my Instagram, what they did, I was on 30,000 followers. Every time I would do a big video, I would go up 50 followers or 100 followers, and I would also go down 100 followers. So when Elon Musk came into ownership, I remember vividly, people like Nigel Farage on the right, he went up 800,000 followers, whereas people like Obama, immediately they went down 3 million followers. And so there was a lot of manipulation they were doing to accounts like yours. Yeah. But bringing it back to Australia and our laws, this is why I get so animated about how they treat right-wingers versus legitimate terrorists. We have people that have been buried now, Australian citizens that are dead because the government didn't use the existing laws we have on the books.
Right.
And now they want to pass more laws after an investigation is still ongoing. I mean, where were these guys? Why did they go to the Philippines? Who did they not end up meeting up with ISIS? We don't have answers to any of these questions.
Right.
And so...
We've had something similar in the United States. During the Biden administration, they were using FBI agents to go after, people, Catholics who, like the Latin Mass. They were going after people who were at school board meetings to go and take license plates there. One of the big changes that we've seen last year under the Trump administration is they actually doubled the number of arrests of criminals, okay? Because they weren't spending their time going and doing these other kind of political things that are there. It's one of the many reasons that we have seen this, what looks like a historic drop in violent crime rates this last year in the United States. It looks like we're on track for the lowest murder rate ever recorded in U.S. history, over a 20% drop this last year. And my bet is that when the data comes out in September, we're going to see a big drop in violent crime across the board. During the Biden administration, the Bureau of Justice Statistics indicates that there was a 59% increase in felony violent crimes over the 4 years of the Biden administration. That's by far the largest percentage increase that we have ever had in violent crime in the United States. And so, you go and you have the government do stupid things, like go and deal with these political things rather than going and after real criminals that's there.
Well,
there's an opportunity cost for that. You're giving up, we could have discouraged real criminals during that period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying it's the same as what you're saying, rather than going and focusing on these people who would do these types of terrorist attacks. They're going in after people like you who aren't a threat in the same way.
So in the Australian context, I remember in 2020, because my show's been going for about 5 or 6 years now, I remember covering stories of our FBI here, ACO. They basically said that the majority of our work, more than 50%, is to do with radical right-wing extremists. And that's been the case for the last 5
Biden had the
years.
same thing. He kept on saying, the real danger in the United States was radical right-wing extremists. He also would call them white supremacists and stuff too.
Yeah, and in the wake of this Bondi shooting, it's like, hang on, how did this Islamist slip through the cracks? He was on your watch list. He proceeded to legally purchase a gun. He purchased a gun here, legally.
It took 3 years to go through the process to get it. Why did it take so long? Why did they finally approve it?
Yeah, and that's the thing. He was knocked back by the New South Wales Liberal right-wing government for years, and then when Chris Minns came in, the Labor government, they ended up approving it. But with regards to it, it really is the perfect storm, because after COVID, there was an enormous morale plunge with the police. They were forced to enforce these lockdown laws and ridiculous 5-kilometer restrictions, and a lot of them left the force early. They had an early retirement or whatever. So police recruitment's down. Now the police standards for recruitment are dropping. They're not accepting the best and brightest that want to join the force.
Right.
They've dropped the requirements. So we've got less competent police. We've got a shortage of police. I think from talking to the officers that I've spoken to, there's a 30% below what they actually need. And now we've got this perfect storm where they've misallocated resources. They're going after right-wingers. I don't know if you follow the Nazis in Australia, the NSN guys. People like Joel Davis, he doesn't like me. He wants to deport people like me that were born here, but I'm not white.
Right.
We don't agree, but they've gone after people like him for saying to go and flood a member of Parliament's comment section and whatever. He said it in a very unsavoury way. But with amazing government efficiency, they've gone after him. They've locked him up within a couple days. And he has been locked there away from his newborn baby that was born while he was there. He's been denied, I do believe, a Bible as well. He doesn't have access to a Bible at all. And he's not getting the proper access to legal counsel and everything. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. Why didn't you treat these Islamists that have been on your watch list for some time like that? And we had, I've introduced to you Rami. He does a lot of the filming for Bishop Murray. I've spoken to the bishop about this, he's very angry, and he's tried to reach out to the government officials. And he said, when I was stabbed in the eye, where was this response when a Christian bishop was stabbed? Why is it when this happens in Bondi, you do this massive all of government approach, state, local, federal. But when a Christian bishop in Western Sydney is stabbed in the eye, there's none of this stuff. You're still going after people like me and right-wingers. And so, no, look, I've got a lot of pent-up anger about this. I'll shut my mouth here. But there's a lot of Australians that are fair-minded that look at this and they hear what you're saying and they're like, what's going on? Who are the government really serving?
Well, we have censorship that's going on all over the world right now. Yeah, I can only imagine what it'd be like if the Democrats had won the presidential election this last time, and they may in the near future. But last year, you had a number of prominent Democrats in the United States going to the European Union to go and egg them on for going and using their rules to go and kind of impose censorship in the United States. And so, Elon Musk buying Twitter has made a huge difference on things. But, if the EU, if the UK, if Canada, if Australia and others impose fines on people like that for doing things, then, God only knows how long they're going to be able to do it. The Trump administration, I think, is trying its best to kind of push back on other countries engaging that type of censorship. But, it's a lot of the world. England, they're arresting something like 30 people a day for censorship type issues.
I think it's like 10 to 15,000 a year.
Okay. Yeah, it could be more than that.
Can I ask, you mentioned the UK earlier off camera about how their laws have changed, restricting gun laws over the last few decades, and it hasn't exactly made the place better. I was hoping you could opine a bit about that.
Right. Well, one comparison that people often make is they'll say, look, the UK has a low homicide rate compared to the United States. They have strict gun control laws, so it must be the strict gun control laws that have done it. The thing is, they had even lower homicide rates compared to the United States before they had the gun control laws. So there's an excellent book from Harvard University Press by a historian named Joyce Lee Malcolm, and she looks at murder rates in England over a period of like 1,000 years. But in 1900, London, greater metro area in London had like 8 million people that were living there. There were 2 gun murders in London at that time, 5 armed robberies. And the thing is, there were no gun control laws there. The first gun control laws went into effect in 1920, 20 years later. In fact, if you ever want to do something fun, go look at old copies of the London Sunday Times, because they had all sorts of bizarre guns, walking stick guns. They had, your walking stick was essentially a gun. You pull a trigger on it. Wow. You have briefcase guns. You have a trigger on your handle there. Right. You have book guns. That just a book that you press a button on it and fire a bullet. And it's like, come on, guys. I mean, it's like everything was a gun, and and they had like no regulations on it at all. The first gun control regulations, 1920, had nothing to do with concerns about crime. What it had to do with was the fact that you just had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and after World War I, there were a lot of unemployed soldiers that had just come back, and the British government was worried that they would have a Bolshevik Revolution in the UK, and so the first gun control laws they had there were fees, essentially, to make it so that lower and middle income Britons couldn't afford to have a gun. And so anyway, you had 1920, 1956 was another big gun control, and then January 97, they had the ban on handguns. And the thing is, so, I mean, it was so low to begin with. You look at it and you say, 2 gun murders in London. I can't even get my mind around something like that. And so the point is that there was something different there, independent of any gun control, social mores or whatever it was that was going on. Sure. And after the 97 handgun ban, over the next 8 years, the homicide rate in the UK increased by 50%. And then it fell again after that, but that was only because right at that time they had a huge increase in the number of police. People were very concerned about the amount of violence in the UK, and so over a 2-year period of time they increased the number of police by 14%. Over a 4-year period of time, they increased the number of police by 18%, and then but even with that big increase in the number of police, you go out 17, 18 years, it only brought the crime rate down to what it was right before the ban that went into effect. And so, it's just, I don't think just making simple cross-sectional comparisons, which is often what the newspapers do. You want to kind of look before and after averages, and that gets to what we were talking about before with the fact that, you look around the world, there are a number of places that have tried to ban either all guns or all handguns. Can you point to one single example where murder rates fell or even stayed the same? You can't even find one where murder and homicide rates stayed the same. It goes up every time, and often by very large amounts. And I would think that should give gun control advocates a little pause about whether or not, they're doing the right thing on these things. And again, the other point is just that who is benefiting the most from having guns? It's basically the most vulnerable people in society. People on the left claim that they care about the poor. They claim that they care about minorities. They claim that they care about women. And yet, when they make it so that people don't have guns, though, or very costly to have guns. I mean, right now, you have to belong to a shooting club and stuff like that. Well, that's hundreds of dollars a year just to belong to that. Yeah. That's essentially a tax. Who are they stopping from being able to do it? Is it the poor people? Are they the ones who are members of these clubs? And the answer is no. So, it's true in the United States, too. A lot of the gun control regulations, we're talking before about the fees that you have to do for these background checks and things like that. California and other states, when they have to issue concealed carry permits, it can be $1,000 to go and do that. I'll give you a simple example. Illinois and Indiana are states right next to each other, very similar in many ways. In Illinois, about 4% of the adult population has a concealed carry permit. In Indiana, the most recent numbers I've seen is about 23%. Why the difference between them? Well, it's pretty easy to understand. In Illinois, it costs about $450 to go through the whole process to get a concealed carry permit. In Indiana, it's $0. They don't even charge you for the background check, kind of the example we were talking about before here in Australia. You make it more costly. Fewer people are going to go and get permit. But it's not just the number. You change the mix of people who go and get permits. In Indiana, you see zip codes which are heavily minority, poor areas where people have concealed handgun permits. In Illinois, it's basically wealthy suburbs where you see the people with the permits. Now, it's great that the wealthy, well-to-do people are able to go and afford these fees and things like that, but that's not where the crime is, okay? If you're going to reduce crime, you have to have it so that people who are likely to be crime victims are the ones who are going to be able to go and protect themselves. And so, not only are you going to have less of an impact in Illinois because you have a smaller percentage with permits, but it's the wrong percent. I could have 100% of the people in an area where it's zero crime getting a permit. It's not going to have any impact on crime. And so...
it's like, you need a permit in a black area where it's like one of the lowest socioeconomic areas.
But Democrats claim that they care about the blacks, that they care about poor. So you'll have states in the past, like Texas, voted to reduce the fees for getting a permit from $140 to $40. All but one of the Democrats voted against lowering the fee. All the Republicans voted for it.
Yeah.
And so,
The Democrats have been in charge of places like Chicago for 70 years.
Yeah.
80 years.
I'll give you another quick example. A few years ago, I got a list of all the concealed carry permit holders in Los Angeles County. Very heavily Democratic area that's there. So nationwide, outside of California and New York, you have over 9% of the adult population with a concealed carry permit. In Los Angeles County, a county of like 8.5 million people, they had like 341 permits. That's a tiny fraction. So anyway, you go through the list there. Only 7% of their permits are women. Nationwide, about 30% of permit holders are women. Only about 5% of permit holders were black. Only about 6% of permit holders were Hispanic. About 54% of the population in Los Angeles County is Hispanic. About 12% is black. So is it just that women and Hispanics and blacks didn't have crimes being committed against them in Los Angeles County, compared to the rest of the country? No, what happened was you used to have to provide a, quote, a good reason to some local public official who is a Democrat for why you should be able to get a permit. And it just turns out that the only people that they gave permits to were wealthy, politically connected individuals who would go and give money to the Democrats' Senate, sheriff's campaign that were there, not the people who really needed the most. I'm glad wealthy people were able to get permits, but is it just that women in Los Angeles County aren't being stalked? That blacks who live in Watts or other high crime areas or Hispanics don't have concerns about their safety? Simply saying that you were concerned about your safety and that you lived in a dangerous area wouldn't get those people a permit, even if they were willing to go and pay the fees and stuff to be able to go and get it. And so, I look at the left and they say how much they care about these people. And I just say, well,
don't really.
So you only let the wealthy people go and protect themselves? And the fees and the costs that you have here, it's basically going to only be well-to-do individuals who are going to be able to have guns here.
Yeah. With the UK, I mean, one of the arguments is that, they should probably bring back guns there because the fact that the crime's out of control, they've got these mass Pakistani rape gangs going around. This is a great way to protect women there, make sure they're not getting raped over there. But also knife crime in London, it's like becoming one of the worst in the world.
So there's a lot of comparisons you can make across countries. Unfortunately, Australia doesn't have this detailed data for crime, but there's something called hot burglaries or residential robberies. These are burglaries that occur while the residents are at home. I mentioned before that even with kind of the low numbers there for the reasons why I measured, the burglary rate in Australia is like 2.5 times the burglary rate in the United States. In the UK, the burglary rate's about twice as high as it is in the United States. But 60% of the time that burglaries occur in the UK, the residents are at home. Actually, it's 59%. But in the United States, it's 13%. Another point I'll make is that the time of day for burglaries, and burglaries in the UK occur in the evening. In the United States, it occurs like at 2 p.m. And one other fact I'll mention, that American burglars spend about twice as long looking around to make sure nobody's home before they break in. All that's consistent. The reason why they do it at 2 p.m. is that people are likely to be out at that time. And they, even then, even though they're likely to be out, they still spend twice as long casing a home before they break in to try to make doubly sure nobody's there.
Right.
In the UK, the reason why they break in the evening is they want people to be home. And the reason why they want people to be home is they can force them then to tell them where their valuables are. They're willing to forego learning that information in the United States. And take the risk that they may not find the valuable stuff there because they're more worried about getting shot.
There's a great quote from Thomas Sowell about this. He said...
He was a professor of mine.
Was he?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, roll out the red carpet. Black economist, one of the best American economists in my view. He was a student of
Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman, and he was a socialist for a brief time.
Yeah, no, I know.
Friedman. It's like, wow. But no, I really look up to him. He made a great quote about the UK crime. He said the government there has effectively made burglaries a safe profession.
Yeah.
You know, by
it's like the gun-free zone stuff we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
No, Tom was an amazing professor. I had him for one of his last classes at UCLA before he went to Stanford.
Right.
And he stopped teaching at that point. And the thing about Tom, so I took him for graduate history of thought. I was an undergraduate at the time. And the first day there was like 23 people or something in the class. By the second lecture, so it met once a week for 2.5 hours. By the second lecture, we were down to 3 people. And we were reading 500 to 700 pages a week, be reading like Smith and Ricardo and Marx and also, all sorts of people. And what Tom would do is he didn't lecture. What he would do is he would stand in front of your desk and basically ask you questions for like an hour. And it was like you couldn't hide. I mean, it was like a final exam every week.
Right.
I was spending like 4 or 5 days each week just studying for his class.
Right.
And it was
just to debate the man.
I wasn't debating. I just didn't want to be. And there's only so many times you could say, I have no clue what it is. and the thing is, his questions weren't, what did this guy say? His questions were, does the economics of this person on this point make sense? So it wasn't like I could just read it and memorize it. I had to read it and think about the 500 pages or 700 pages I was reading. And it was like, It was crazy. I mean,
You've been through the fire. There were only 3 people left in that class. Is that what
right. Well, everybody else saw, this is crazy. I'm not going to go and read that many. I mean, they didn't even know it was going to be like that.
Yeah.
They just saw, this is just too much reading. There's just like, no way I'm going to get through all this.
Good value though, right? Set you up.
Oh, it was amazing. And the thing is, again, he wasn't teaching you to memorize stuff. He was teaching you to think like an economist. And, it was really, I've never had a professor that was as grueling and as demanding as he was.
He's a national treasure in my view.
Oh, yeah, no. And another person who was a good friend of mine was Walter Williams. I don't know if you know who Walter was.
Right.
We must have had Walter over. Walter was a UCLA PhD. He had a similar path through life that Tom did in terms of he was basically a communist, when Walter was young. Then he went to UCLA and basically got changed in his views. In later years, I must have had, Walter taught at George Mason, but he had a home up near Philadelphia, and I was at Wharton, and we had a house up there, and I must have had him over for dinner, like he and his wife, over like 30 times or something like that over the years. And he was, of course, extremely close to Tom. But unfortunately, Walter's gone now, died a few years ago. But, Tom's still kicking.
Well, no one ever wants to debate Tom. I mean, Tom, I've seen so many of his conversations. I think it's Harvard does those regular conversations with him.
Uncommon Knowledge at Stanford.
Stanford, right, with they go back.
Peter Robinson.
Peter Robinson's done an amazing job. If you guys ever want to take apart some of these socialist policies, you've got to start with those conversations.
Yeah, well, I think Peter has said that Tom's appearances are their most watched that they have. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing what he did for all these decades.
Can I ask you, because you've probably done a deep dive into this, New York, I'm trying to remember the name of the mayor during 9/11.
Rudy Giuliani.
Giuliani, described as America's mayor at the time, maybe even now still. He's quite...
his association with Trump probably has gotten people demonize him more.
Yeah, I think so. But he is still respected for what he did in cleaning up New York's.
Yeah, sure.
And I was wondering.
Well, Dinkins, who was the mayor beforehand, you had really astronomical murder and violent crime rates. Giuliani dramatically increased the size of the police force there. You mentioned earlier about changing standards for police. He greatly improved the standards for hiring police, make sure that they had certain physical and mental capabilities. And he also had this kind of broken windows hypothesis where you go after even the small crimes, because if people don't feel safe being out in the community, you have fewer witnesses and criminals feel freer to go and commit crimes. It was a friend of mine, James Q. Wilson, criminologist, who basically came up with that. But he also did something that was important, and that is they moved the police to where the crimes were occurring. Okay, so
because they were occurring on those streets.
Well, in different places in the city, and so they would go and essentially they'd find where the crimes were occurring, and they'd flood that area with police. And it kind of gets back to our earlier thing about who gets the permits. You want to have it so that it make it risky where the crime's occurring for the criminals to go and commit crime. And he had a huge reduction in the crime rate that's there. Unfortunately, de Blasio kind of undid some of the stuff, and the new mayor, Mandami, is threatening to undo more of the stuff that's there. But, it's not rocket science. If you want to reduce crime, you got to make it riskier for criminals to commit crime. And you do that with higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. And, I had other things that I disagreed with Giuliani.
Sure.
But in terms of that policy, he saved a lot of lives. One of the ironies is Trump this last year, when he federalized law enforcement in D.C., he was attacked as being racist because they said the only reason why he's doing it is because it's a heavily black city. When he took over, there was an 18-day period in a row where there was 0 murders that occurred in D.C. The odds of that happening, if you look at like the murder rate a couple months beforehand or the year before, is like 1 in 18,000 or something crazy like that. And the thing is, the latest data we had at the time that I looked at was for 2021 up to 2021, where like 96% of the murders in D.C. were blacks. So you go for 18 days without a single murder. Whose lives are you saving in that case?
Blacks.
Right. 96% of the murder victims have been black.
How racist of him. How dare he save those black people.
Boy, what a horrible guy.
It's a bit like abortion, how he goes after abortion. It's just like, how dare he, stop black family, black babies from dying, different issue. But it is astonishing, the woke mind virus like that. We're fans. We're in case you didn't.
I couldn't tell.
I've literally got his as a Christmas decoration. I've got all the swing states and everything.
Oh, okay, that's right. You're missing one of those bobblehead Trump.
Yeah,
oh.
You know what? I actually bought one and I brought it back from Washington. I gave it to a One Nation senator. One of the staffers working for Senator Malcolm Roberts.
Okay,
the staffer, she specifically asked for one. I was like, I will get you one. I'm going to CPAC.
But you didn't get one for yourself then too?
You know what? I bought so much other stuff. I was overweight, and
okay.
I have to give some of them away. I want to get it. I do want to get one.
That's funny.
But no, John, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really feel we ought to? Because I could talk to you forever, but we're getting close to the 2-hour mark.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But, it's, to me, I have followed Australia for a number of years, and it's interesting to me how much misinformation there is here. And I blame that on a lot of just the academics that you have here. You don't have people who are kind of willing to go and step forward and make what are simple, obvious arguments, or should be. And I guess I have a hard time believing that the academics are really that incompetent here. I don't believe that. I think that unfortunately there are lots of people, lots of researchers who let their political views infect the research and the comments that they make on things. And, you know, I hope that can change. I don't know. I mean, I looked at countries like Argentina, for example, and the changes that they're having there across a lot of South America. Chile just elected a conservative. Probably in April, I'm supposed to be going and talking to the president of Ecuador. I've been there a couple times in the last year or so. You know, I think people around the world are starting to change. Milei's success in Argentina, I think, is beginning to have a bit of a revolution in the rest of South America. You know, the irony is Chile had been kind of the economic miracle in South America. But because of Pinochet there being with a military dictator, the rest of South America didn't want to follow that. So you have like Chile doing incredibly well and Venezuela going from the wealthiest country in South America to being about the poorest there over a couple decades. When I've been to South America, I mean, I guess they've had like 8 million people leave Venezuela over the last couple decades because of the problems that are there. You have people in the streets in Ecuador begging, in Peru begging for food because they've left Venezuela. In Brazil, you run into people all across South America. You run into refugees from Venezuela, and you would think that would, they see Chile doing extremely well under the free market stuff that they have there, and Venezuela being a disaster. But Milei may be turning around. The big problem has been, when I've been to Brazil like 5 times in the last 5 years. You have this issue that people just get promised free things, and so they think, well, the socialists are promising me free stuff here, and so you say, well, they promised free stuff in Venezuela, and after a while there wasn't even toilet paper that you could go and buy at the stores.
Yeah.
It's kind of Margaret Thatcher's old thing about eventually you run out of other people's money in there. But Milei has turned around Argentina so much. They just had these elections in October, and his party just did extremely well. They basically now have taken control of the House. Now the Senate, only a third of the seats were up. But they did very well there. It'll probably take another election or two to turn that around and be able to get his real stuff through. But I hope these types of examples will kind of spread to even countries like Australia and stuff, that people will see the differences that were there.
Yeah.
Because, the national media, the international media was saying Milei, he's going to be a disaster. The economy's going to tank.
It's a miracle now. And they're like, oh, it's a miracle.
Right, yeah.
Well, maybe it's just good economic policy.
Yeah, it's just a random coincidence.
Yeah, that's it.
These things happen.
Yeah, someone like Thomas Sowell would laugh. I can just hear his laugh at that and say, well, he followed proper economic principles. That's what's happened.
Well, he followed the data. He was somebody who, and you mentioned earlier, he's somebody who let the data and the evidence change his views. He had very different views at one time, and basically was a socialist type. And but he was wise enough to change.
Me too.
And one thing I have to say also is just academics, just in general, are so isolated from the real world.
They bear no cost for the policies they push as well.
Right, yeah. And the thing is, academia is weird because you're consuming your own output. It's like, I have to tell you, academics go right from undergraduate to graduate school to being a PhD and being an academic. They've never been out in the real world at all. I remember one time, I have too many of these stories, but I'll give you one. I I was chief economist of the Sentencing Commission. One of the big debates that was going on in economics was a series of papers trying to explain how the minimum wage laws were being enforced when you only had like 800 agents enforcing them, as well as all the other labor laws in the whole country. And the penalty for underpayment, paying too low of a minimum wage, was only half the underpayment that was there. And you had one paper after another in top journals trying to explain this puzzle. So anyway, I had lunch one time with the deputy legal counsel for the Department of Labor and the chief economist over at the Department of Labor when I was chief economist at the Sentencing Commission. And we had our lunch, and we were talking about the different penalties that we're putting forward. And at the end of the lunch, I said, by the way, there's this big debate going on in the econ journals right now about how is it that you could have everybody obeying the minimum wage law when you violate it, you only pay half the underpayment. Why not violate it all the time? And they look at me like I'm from Mars. And they say, what are you talking about, half the underpayment? And apparently what had happened was the original academics who had kind of started this debate had looked at one page where part of the penalty was half the underpayment. But if they turned the page to go and look at the other, there are all sorts of other penalties there that end up being like twice the underpayment that was there for it. And there are all sorts of other rules about how the workers themselves know that they're being underpaid and can go and sue for twice the payment. So you don't even need to have the agents out there enforcing it. But it's just a simple example of how academics live in their own world. You're saying they don't bear the consequences of it. They don't even know the facts that they're trying to explain. I can't tell you the number of times. I'll give you one other example, and that is there was this one paper I remember about low jack devices on cars. These were little radio transponders that you'd put on expensive cars, and if the car got stolen, they could turn it on, and then the police could zero in and find it. And the thing is, the insurance companies weren't going and giving much of a discount for people paying the $600 or so to go and get the low jack devices on. And so you have these academics in one paper, I remember, saying how stupid these insurance companies are. They should go and do this. But they never called up the insurance companies to ask them why they did it. You have so many academics, they see something, they say, well, I would do it differently. And they never ask why the people who have their own money at stake not do it. So I called up the insurance companies and I asked them, I said, well, what's the deal here? And they said, well, yeah, we often get the car back, but, maybe it's a few days later and the car is completely stripped. So it's like we would have gotten it back anyway, eventually stripped. And so, there's really not much point for us doing that. And so, but it's just, why not call up and talk to people? But the thing is, academics think they're like the smartest people in the galaxy. Yeah. And so they look down on everybody else. One last point. I talk too much, but one last point, and that is, so I've taught in econ departments, I've taught undergraduates, I've taught graduate students, I've taught public policy, I've taught law students, I've taught MBAs. And the students I enjoyed teaching the most were the MBAs. And the reason is because it used to be, it's not so much anymore, but it used to be that you had to be out in the real world for like 5 years before you could get admitted to Wharton, okay, at the University of Pennsylvania. And the thing was, they were much more critical consumers of what you're doing. When you teach an undergraduate, you tell them something, they write it down, they memorize it, and they give it right back to you. They may not even understand it, but they'll just memorize it and give it back to you. And but for MBAs, they're giving and this was back in the 90s, you'd have somebody who would be making $150,000 a year or something like that, or $125,000, plus they're paying $60,000 tuition to go to Wharton. And, their attitude was, look, I'm giving up a lot to be here. I'm not just going to listen to you philosophize about something. I want to know how I can use the information that you're giving me. And so they kind of force the professors to be real world and tell them, how does this apply to the real world? And I had to teach a class one time because somebody was sick on international arbitration agreements. I knew nothing about international arbitration agreements. And the thing is, you go into this class and you have some kid from Germany who did international arbitration agreements. You have some kid from, Brazil who had done international arbitration agreements. And then one thing I learned as a professor is do not show fear. Okay. Because you have people who have been doing this for 5 years or something like that, or maybe longer in some cases, who knew more about it than you did.
Yeah.
Doing that. I could read the papers or whatever beforehand and make a couple calls and maybe find somebody who I could ask a question about or something beforehand. But, you just had to kind of take it in the flow and do it. And it's just, but I'm just saying the MBA students, since a lot of them had actually experienced things in the real world out there, they were much, much more fun to teach. And they actually would kind of force the academics to be better academics.
That's amazing. No, that's amazing. When I look at that, I just think about, and I forgive myself looking at university. I do think they're due for a shakeup, and I think AI is bringing that. I mean, I don't envy the current.
AI is another topic.
Yeah.
I have to tell you. So, AI is. First of all, I don't think AI is very smart on a lot of things. If you go and ask them to critically evaluate things, I look at it and I say, "Boy, you're not making the best arguments here," but also just the political biases. So, you talk about kind of censorship in social media. Anybody who's used Google for search, for example, will know that certain more left-wing stuff is given more emphasis than others. So we've done it like 3 or 4 times now. We've kind of asked AI chatbots, maybe 20 of them, a certain set of questions about crime and gun control. And my son, Maxim Lott, has a website called Tracking AI, and he has kind of, the political test to see whether you're conservative or libertarian or statist or liberal or whatever. I kind of got the idea just to do it on crime. So I'd ask him questions like, do higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates reduce crime? Now, I think it's pretty obvious that it's the case. None of the AI chatbots agreed with that.
Wow.
All of them disagreed. Half of them strongly disagreed, say that definitely, clearly higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates do not reduce crime. And, you see that bias across the board on questions. And on gun control, it's at least as bad. So I would ask him questions like, things that we've talked about today, like things like, can you name me one place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns and seen murder rates go down? And so they all come back with Australia. And you say, wait a second, guys. You say, first of all, Australia didn't ban all guns or all handguns, okay? And you try to point that out to the AI thing, and they argue with you a little bit. And then you say, besides, it's not very useful just to look at before and after averages. And you try to explain that to them. And I have some people that I know who are involved in AI development on these things. And basically what they tell me is that the programs are set up that after a certain point, they concede to you if you're arguing with them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change their responses when somebody asks the same question, 20 minutes later. Then they just go back to where they were before.
I've had that before. I was in a debate on SBS here, and I was getting fact-checked by their fact checks that they put in after, very selectively edited fact checks. They made the mistake of fact-checking me on property statistics. Now, that's my profession before I got into all this. I did a property economics degree. It was only a bachelor, but I know my stuff. And they started saying, hang on, your statistic on the fact that Australia is one of the best producers and builders is wrong. It's not ranked number 2. Or it's not that we have a gold standard. We're actually ranked this in the OECD. And I started digging into it and debating the AI, and it conceded to me, and it realized that the definition that the OECD define it versus the one I used is different, and therefore I am right. And it does build in a lot of questions like, hang on, lawmakers and people in the public sphere are basing new laws off this basis.
Right.
How can you fact check someone off that? And how can you not change and learn from that? Is it truly AI if it's not learning? And so and I guess going back to it, what does that say about education as well? I mean, are people really learning, or are they just resorting?
I mean, I mean, I talked to a lot of professors. We talked about Gigi. I was just talking to her earlier, a couple of days ago, about students using AI. You know, people are using it to be lazy. You know, they just let the AI chatbots things. I've written 10 books. And I've written, I don't know, 120 peer-reviewed papers or whatever. And the thing is, I learn as I'm going through the process and writing these things. You know, you discover stuff, and it helps you go and phrase your arguments. You know, you go and you learn things. You pick up data. You know, there may be a sentence in a book that took me a week to put the data together on something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the answer was going to be beforehand. So, you know, it just, you aren't going to be as imaginative. You're not going to learn the process of thinking through things critically. And I think it makes people lazy. I mean, if you're not writing stuff, then I think just those parts of your brain, you're never going to develop and use. Yeah. And it's just, students are using it all the time these days. You talk to professors, and it's not just them. People in newsrooms are using it. People, and of course, they would be using Google. You know, the thing is, I assume you talk to like reporters and stuff a fair amount. Reporters aren't experts on lots of things. You know, basically, a lot of them went to journalism school, and you know, they aren't an expert in anything. So what they go and they do, they go and they have a little staff meeting at like 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning, and they get assignments for that day. And so by the end of the day, they're supposed to have something written up. And so they get done at maybe 10:30. The first thing they do is they go to Google or something like that, and they go and do a search on it, and they see what comes up. And if Google is biased one way, you know, then that's the information that they get.
Yeah.
And they don't have any critical knowledge about the area usually to go and question. And so then they make a couple phone calls based on who they came up there, and you know, and then they write their story that they're going to have. And so you know, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. And the people who go and put their thumb on the scale, whether it's Google News Search or the AI stuff, you know, I try to point out these things, you know, and things like saying, because, you know, something simple, do higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates reduce crime?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm stunned. I don't even understand how a chatbot can convince itself that it has no effect on crime, you know, and half of them strongly believe it.
Even worse with that, I was listening to Tim Pool, and this is 5 years ago. He was saying that even the media, the legacy media, the newspapers, they were starting back then in the early forms of AI, let's say auto-generated articles. They were doing it with weather. They were doing it with a lot of different articles. And one of the concerns I have, and what I discovered in that debate with Abby Chatfield, when I got that fact check saying Australia is actually ranked this in the OECD countries, I was like, okay. And coming from the building industry, I was like, compared to what? When Australia says we've completed this many houses, and that ranks us second in the world, second to Japan, an obvious question being from the construction industry is, did you commence them or did you complete them? Now, the OECD, they register how many you started but they don't say how many you completed.
Oh, wow.
And which is obvious to anyone.
Yeah.
Whereas with
that would be a pretty
Australia,
important thing because you maybe got fired or something in the process.
because being from construction, you know, a lot of things commence, they never complete. Sometimes it's a brand new project. So the OECD, when I was checking, they only measure the ones that are commenced, whereas the Australian record is how many that we actually complete, which is, I think, a more accurate delivery.
Right, yeah.
And so a lot of these articles that are now coming out, they are purely AI. They're reviewed by a journalist and then put out. But if the journalist wasn't from construction or whatever profession the article pertains to, it'll easily slip through the cracks. And it's a real issue that I see with this. But I used to be a socialist, believe it or not. I used to be a Bernie bro back in 2016. And I always feel a little bit better knowing...
Bernie bro in Australia?
Well, yeah, look, there's a little bit of a cult American following of politics. Look, I wasn't an active person. It was more, I followed it out of interest.
Right.
I was like, you know what, I probably lean towards Bernie. But I always cut myself some slack when I think about people like yourself or people like...
well, I used to be a registered Democrat in the United States up until about 1993.
Right.
So I saw the light before you did. But
so did you have Thomas Sowell as your lecturer during that time, or?
I had him before that.
Right.
I was raised by my grandparents, and they were, just probably. I mean, intellectually, I'm sure I had moved before that, but it's just it kind of took some other things to actually get me to pull the trigger on that.
Well, I always cut myself some slack because Milton Friedman was the lecturer for Thomas Sowell, and Thomas Sowell was a socialist at the time. And I'm like, well, if
you didn't have Milton Friedman to go and save you.
So I cut myself some slack. But I do believe when Thomas has been asked about it, he says what you say. It's like, well, when I looked at the facts, I think for me what it was I followed a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff at the time, and I followed it before it was cool in 2020. And what got me out of it was when I started looking at the statistics of, okay, how many unarmed black men are actually shot by police? And it turns out it's like, at the time, it was less than 35, less than 40.
Oh, it's less than that.
Less than that now?
Yeah, it's probably less than 20 or something.
And to be clear, one's not okay. But in some...
Well, no, but even when they say unarmed, you basically, I assume you're using like the Washington Post articles on those things. And they may include, when they say unarmed, that doesn't mean maybe they had a car that they were using.
Yeah.
Maybe they had some other type of weapon other than a gun. They're talking about, do they have a gun there? And somebody may be big and strong too, or something like that. So, and maybe they're going and harming some innocent person at that time.
It's not caught in the story at all, all the statistics.
Right.
Yeah, it really is disgusting the way that it's malpractice. It's academic and it's journalistic malpractice to mislead the public, mislead lawmakers, and get them whipped up in this emotion and then pass laws that hurt more people. And so John, I really respect what you do. I did also want to mention, you were mentioning some South American countries. I was watching an interview of Bukele and an interview talking about how he fixed El Salvador. And I think that's another great example of how he's come in.
No, it went from about the highest murder rate in the world to one now that's, I don't know, like 4 per 100,000 or something. And, it's like the lowest in Central America or Latin America. I mean, it's not rocket science. He made it risky for criminals to go and commit crime. And, it's interesting. You have a country like Ecuador, which basically went the other way. Ecuador used to be a very safe country there. But there's a socialist president that they had basically threw out the DEA, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, and the U.S. military base that was there. And you try to explain to people that kind of the joke about outrunning the bear. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than whoever you're with. And the thing is... Ecuador became a relatively attractive place for the drug cartels to base then. And now you can't get rid of them because the corruption there, you go there, I've talked to God knows how many government officials down there, that, the saying that everybody says, I gave a talk to the police academy that they have there. I've given talks to senior government officials. The saying is, you take the silver or you take the bullet. And you don't know who's been paid off, and it's just a mess. And so, anyway,
it has an icing effect on societal stability.
Yeah.
In Australia, look, there's a lot of great police officers that are in it for all the right reasons for their community to protect and preserve society's stability. But I tell you what, the top brass, and look, I might lose some, I might put myself in danger here, but I do not trust the police generally. I don't trust them in Australia. I think they're very corrupt. I think they're in bed with people in Australia that are in criminal networks. And I think that we need more people in it for the right reasons getting involved. I've seen what they can do going after people like Anthony Kalouf, tracking his phone, going after him, going people after me and, Romeo Georges and others. And when I see that in Australia, we need good men to stand up because that's how evil triumphs. It's when good men do nothing.
Right.
But John, I want to shout out your books because in Australia, there is a crime wave right now. There's youth crime in Queensland. There's a lot of home invasions happening in Melbourne. I read a story late last year. A homeless man invaded a home and killed both the husband and wife and decapitated one of their heads, put it on a spike. Just disgusting stories. And from our conversation today, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Sudanese gangs running amok in Melbourne with no cost. The police know who they are. They know who these people are. The society is in danger. They're begging out for help. They abide by the rules, but the rules have become an enemy of society. And I wanted to shout out your book, by More Guns, Less Crime, which you guys can find on Amazon. And your website as well. Sorry, you mentioned it.
It's
earlier.
crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, John, do you guys have machete bins?
Yeah, do you guys have machete bins in Melbourne? Are you familiar with this story?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
With the Sudanese gangs, and there have been a lot of viral videos in Australia that have gone around in Melbourne of these Sudanese gangs in shopping malls, crowded shopping malls in the middle of the day, broad daylight, fighting in the shopping malls, fighting in the parking lots. And the government's response, their knee-jerk response was to have these $350,000 per bin, machete bins. It just looks like a skip bin, basically. People could voluntarily rock up and throw their machete in there voluntarily.
And why would they throw it in there?
Exactly. John, we need help. We need help. All right, and I appreciate.
Well, I mean, we've talked about the fact that the crime rate, the violent crime rate, is so much higher here. Burglary rates are so much higher than in the United States, and hopefully, but one book that I have that kind of goes through a lot of just kind of the logic on crime, and part it goes through other things too, is my book called Freedomnomics. Freedomnomics. I didn't pick the title; the publisher did.
Of course.
But
always.
But
what did you want to call it?
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember now. It's been a while.
Yeah, here you guys, Simon and Schuster.
No, it's Regnery. There's a Freakonomics book, but mine is Freedomnomics.
Why the market works?
Yeah, right.
All right, here we go.
John, I was also going to ask you if you've watched the interview with Jeffrey Epstein and your thought of his economics and the way that he thinks economics really work. Or
Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah.
The only Jeffrey Epstein I'm thinking about is the guy that was the pedophile type guy. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
What did he say on economics?
Oh, he was describing how the finance and the banks and how economics in general works in America, and how nobody really knows how it works.
Right.
Well, I don't know.
I thought he was talking about the stock market. He was saying they use.
About
So he was talking about stock trade. Yeah, that's different. So he was talking about stock traders, and he was saying how the reason why they dress it up in all this colorful language, like shorts and whatever, is to sort of make it seem like they're doing a lot, but they're actually not. They're just sort of. It's very speculative, and that's what he was saying about it. Sounds like
I guess economists think that the market does a pretty good job of pricing these things. If you really think that they're making a mistake, you make a lot of money on the stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I guess I kind of stick by the rule that whatever the current price is on something is probably the best estimate of what it is. There's a lot of work that's been done on things like betting markets for kind of predicting election outcomes or other types of things.
Polymarket.
And they do a better job than the polls in terms of that.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, the wisdom of crowds type things. And that applies not just to those types of markets, but to stock markets and other things too. I have a son who is working for a market maker outside of Philly. And, they spend big money to be able to go and try to make trades faster. You cut it down by a half a second or something like that because, it's people are looking for any way they can to try to be better at guessing what's going to be happening to the stock prices before somebody else is able to do so.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of money at stake for them getting it wrong or right. And I guess I've been convinced over time that, because there's so much at stake for getting things right, I think they usually do a pretty good job.
Well, John, I appreciate your time. Courage is contagious. And with academics, you speaking up, especially as an American coming here, you come with an abundance of wisdom and knowledge and tactics to talk against some of the academics that are selling us a bit of a lie on what's going on here. And I really appreciate you being courageous and talking up on this stuff. It's not exactly the way to financially, do well.
Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I did want to shout out your websites, which I'm going to put in.
crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
Yep. So we've got that here, guys. I'm going to include that in the description. We've also got his 2 books, More Guns, Less Crime, if you want to buy that as well. And there's also Freedonomics, which has some of the fundamentals that he was alluding to. But John, I've thoroughly. I hope this isn't our last discussion. I've actually got a whole bunch of notes on other things I'd love to get to, but I've actually got to get some.
Well, okay. I appreciate you having me here. We've been going for 2.5 hours, so I appreciate your time. Well, thank you.
Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. And I just have, you know what? I've got to ask this one last question. I just remembered, John. So, John, with obviously the recent shooting in Bondi, this has been a very apt discussion, but some people might look at me and be like, Joel, how could you have John on? How could you even talk about guns or even promote guns in Australia, especially with, the founder of Turning Point USA that was recently shot, Charlie Kirk,
right,
who you knew and you'd done interviews with as well?
Well, I mean, he asked me to go and give talks at some of their Turning Point meetings, a couple of them, and I would kind of talk to him backstage or something like that a little bit.
Yeah, and I was just getting
at a dinner. There was a dinner that they had that I talked to him and stuff like that.
And I was just wondering, what would you say to the people that are like, Joel, shame on you. How are you talking about guns?
Well, look,
and your
guns clearly make it easier for bad things to happen, but they also make it easier for people to protect themselves and prevent bad things from happening. And there are a lot more good people out there than there are bad people. You find that people use guns defensively about 5 times more frequently each year than guns are used in the commission of crime. And look, as we talked about, police are extremely important in stopping crime, but the police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crime's occurred. And the question is, what should people do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves? And as we were saying, the people who benefit the most from owning guns are those who are weaker physically, women and the elderly, and the people who are the most likely victims of violent crime, poor minorities usually, who live in high-crime urban areas. If the police could be there all the time and protect everybody, that'd be great, but they can't. And so just as you can deter criminals with higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates and longer prison sentences, the fact that victims can defend themselves when the police aren't there also deters criminals from committing crimes. And, the thing you have to understand is that having a gun is by far the safest course of action for somebody to take when they're confronted by a criminal. It's even more so for women and the elderly, but even men benefit, though not as much, from having a gun when they're having to confront a criminal. Criminals are not stupid. They may be not very bright, but they're not so stupid that they don't see the fact that if they have an easy target, they're going to take that, a weaker victim, that they're going to go after. You know, if I have a Doberman Pinscher or I have a little tiny toy poodle and somebody's really mad and they're going to kick a dog, are they going to kick a Doberman Pinscher? My guess is not, okay? But if they're a mean, vicious person, they may kick a little toy poodle because there's nothing the dog's going to do to them.
Yeah.
And it's just, criminals are no different. And you got to, people are less likely to do things if it's risky for them to do. And even just the threat that somebody might be able to defend themselves can deter criminals from doing it. And, Bondi Beach and others, these mass shootings that you raise have a huge impact on this debate. But people have to realize, and we went through this in our discussion, that these guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. They're picking the targets that they do because they know they're easier targets. They know that they'll be the only person there with a gun.
Yep.
And that makes it easier for them to go and kill lots of people. And so, the irony to me is we get these laws passed that create these gun-free zones, that make it so that Jewish people can't even hire security guards that are going to be armed at these places. And then you have an attack, and rather than going back and saying, maybe we should have gotten rid of some of these laws that we had to begin with, they double down in terms of it. And you have to be careful that when you pass these laws, you're not primarily disarming the law-abiding good people who obey these rules and not the criminals.
Yep.
The drug dealers and stuff that you talked about who bring in weapons at the same time, those guys now, they have less to worry about in terms of victims being able to go and defend themselves and the criminals that they sell their weapons to.
Yeah. John, I really appreciate you saying that, because I can see there's going to be some, believe it or not, there's going to be a lot of backlash for me just having this chat on guns, even remotely promoting it. But look, I believe I haven't changed in my view on this. I'm citing statistics from 2018 when I first looked into this, and you've corrected me where I've needed, and you've given me up-to-date stats, and I think the audience is going to get a lot of value out of this. So I appreciate.
Well, thanks for being there.
Your time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this discussion, please do like, share, subscribe, and please do head to our website at tpaust.com.au if you want to join Turning Point Australia, join our mission, and help us push against the filth that is in the government and what they are doing in order to take more of your freedoms away. God bless you all. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys later.